So the Submariner and the Deepsea are kind of similar. If the Submariner is a hammer, the Deepsea is a sledgehammer. So for the purpose of this comparison, I want to consider 5 main points. The first one is size/design, second purpose, third wearability, fourth versatility, value retention and appreciation as the fifth point. So to begin with the size, well, there's a huge difference between the two. The Submariner has got a 40mm case size, whereas the Deepsea has a 44mm case size. Now 4mm doesn't sound much in the real world, but when it comes to watches, that's a lot. But that's not the key aspect of the difference here as well. I'd say the most important difference is actually the thickness. You would have thought I would have gone for the lug-to-lug distance, which is also, I think, more important than just the diameters of the watch. But the thickness on the Deepsea is almost unparalleled. At 18mm thick, the Deepsea is definitely the thickest watch I've ever worn. In contrast, the Submariner is just 12.5mm thick, which is actually really good for a dive watch. Most dive watches are about 12 to 14mm thick, sometimes 15 if they're a little bit chunky, but 18 on the Sea Dweller, Deepsea 44, that's massive. Now there's of course a very valid reason for this, and that's the sheer depth at which this thing can dive at. But we don't really care about that in the practical sense. We love that it can technically do this. That's kind of why people even like the watch in the first place. It's because of the depth rating, but no one's actually going to put this to the test. So what's realistically going to test you is your patience when it wears thin with 18mm of steel on your wrist. Now, speaking about general design, the Submariner just feels so much more at home on the wrist, whereas the Deepsea has a little bit of charm to it. The Submariner seems rather clinical because it's quite common in the Rolex world, not in the general world, but in the Rolex world that's kind of a standard piece, whereas the Deepsea, it takes a special person to wear a Deepsea or even choose to own one, because it is so inconvenient on a daily basis that you really have to like the piece, and you have to like that thickness and the hunk of steel. Essentially, there's a lot of inconveniences and justifications in order to wear that piece, which is what makes it a bit more interesting to me. That kind of leads us into the purpose behind the watch. I mean, not the purpose in terms of telling time or being a watch, but the purpose behind the design of each one of these pieces. Now, the Submariner was designed to be an everyday watch, something that could be worn casually but still packs a punch when it comes to its diving prowess. But the Deepsea, it's the other way around. It's not meant to be wearable, it's meant to do the job. And just a note, unless you're James Cameron, this is not doing the job for you. So then why does the Deepsea even exist? Well, I think it's kind of like the iPhones. Now we've got the iPhone, the regular one, and then you've got the Pro version. So in a way, it has kind of a bigger screen, and it has a better camera that is not really going to make a difference to you anyway. The camera equates to depth rating, if that was not clear. So to summarize, I think the purpose of the Submariner is to go swimming at your local pool, maybe, and the purpose of the Deepsea is to get lost in the ocean only to be found again by a whale. So moving on to wearability, it's pretty clear, isn't it? Well, you really have to have the wrist to wear the Sea Dweller, whereas you just need to be regular to wear the Submariner. Now, can you wear the Submariner on a really large wrist and still make it look good? Yeah, sure, of course you can. But can you wear the Deepsea on a small wrist? No, absolutely not. So that's the juxtaposition when it comes to the versatility as well of these two pieces. That's why the Submariner is a lot more versatile than the Deepsea. But let's now consider someone that's got an ample wrist size so they can wear both. Now, given the opportunity to wear either the Deepsea or the Submariner, I think if you've got a larger wrist, it's a bit more fun to wear the Deepsea. Does that make it versatile? Well, I'd say if you don't have to wear full sleeves, then both the Sub and the Sea Dweller could be equally versatile since they're both monochromatic and have very similar design characteristics. Now, I haven't touched upon the movement at all because they both share the same caliber 3135, a very standard Rolex movement, so there isn't much to compare or talk about there. Now let's get on to the value retention and appreciation part, something that's almost synonymous with the name Rolex. So taking a look at the market values, I'm using Chrono 24 as a reference because it's got the most number of pieces of any given watch listed there. But do keep in mind that they're slightly inflated, about 6 to 10% more than you would get at perhaps a local dealer. So the very bottom end of the Submariner market reveals to be right around 12K. So if we subtract about 6 to 10% off that, 10 might be a little bit high, but still you'd have an amount of about 10.8 to 11K. Now, if we take a look at the Sea Dweller Deepsea, you can see that the bottom of the market is essentially just a little bit under, so about $1,000 under. So with the deduction, I'd assume that the bottom of the market in terms of local dealers is in the high $9,000, just about $10,000. Now, the top of the market for a Sub is clearly around the $15,000 mark. This really depends on the condition. Some of them are stickered, some of them are technically unworn, which is obviously very desirable when you are talking about a discontinued model. But I think a reasonably good condition piece from the recent years should run you about 13 to 14,000. Now, the top of the market of the Deepsea is also kind of the same. It's about 15,000. But the thing is, this is not the more desirable Deepsea. The James Cameron is the one that commands the real premium, and that goes over 16, from 16 to 19,000. It's all over the place now because that's technically one of the hot watches, even though it's so large. But this one, the black dial Deepsea 44, it should also be right around that Sub range, and I think a decent piece would run you just about $1,000 short of the Submariner right now, so about 12 to 13,000. Do keep in mind that both the watches I'm talking about here are the previous gen, so the 116610 and 11660. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching. Leave your comments down below and see you in the next video.